In the morning when you leave, I find myself in your bedroom, laying in your bed.
The film presents a deeply nuanced exploration of queer women's emotional lives through four interwoven narratives that foreground interiority, longing, and the complexities of relational visibility, beginning with the storyline between Penny and Alana, which illustrates the ways unspoken desire, misunderstanding, and social assumptions can both obscure and clarify emotional truth, as Penny harbors a crush that she carefully navigates while simultaneously appearing innocuous within everyday social structures. And Alana's initial misreading of Penny's feelings toward her husband demonstrates how heteronormative frameworks shape perception, compelling queer women to decode one another within a culture that frequently interprets women's affection through the lens of conventional romance, thereby emphasizing the constant negotiation queer women must engage in to have their emotional lives recognized authentically. The scene's tension resolves in an emotionally clarifying moment where both characters openly acknowledge their attraction to each other, not as sensationalized confession, but as mutual recognition and affirmation, and the film's handling of this revelation is strikingly tender, avoiding spectacle in favor of conveying the gravity of trust, vulnerability, and the exhilaration of being seen for one's genuine self, which resonates powerfully for LGBTQ+ audiences, who may understand the labor of inhabiting spaces where one must balance desire, discretion, and social acceptability, and the scene's depiction of repeated affirmations of beauty, sweetness, and admiration functions as a form of emotional literacy, teaching both characters and viewers to articulate value, affirmation, and longing without recourse to judgment or shame, highlighting how queer women cultivate intimacy in relationally cautious but profoundly meaningful ways. The preceding narratives, including the interactions between Veronica and Pepper, further situate this film as a meditation on care, mentorship, and intergenerational understanding within queer women's experiences, particularly in contexts where pressure and invisibility shape body image, self-worth, and relational confidence, as Veronica's gentle confrontation and personal disclosure model, how honesty and empathy can foster emotional safety, while recognizing the historical and familial forces that have shaped Pepper's self-perception. And the film's attention to these dynamics underscores the ethical and emotional dimensions of queer care, demonstrating that mentorship, admiration, and protective attention can operate as pathways for love and recognition when unencumbered by coercion or expectation, allowing queer viewers to see themselves in characters who navigate the terrain of attention, correction, and boundary setting without erasing desire or diminishing emotional authenticity. Similarly, the narrative of Zoe and Alina, which initially centers on boundary conflict and frustration, operates on a subtle emotional register, revealing how attraction, envy, and the struggle for recognition manifest in everyday interpersonal dynamics, and the depiction of theft and intrusion is carefully framed not as moralistic spectacle, but as an allegory for the pressures queer women face in shared spaces where emotional visibility must constantly be negotiated. And this narrative invites reflection on how feelings of admiration or infatuation may be expressed indirectly in a culture that often polices women's intimacy with one another, thereby foregrounding the emotional labor required to assert and protect oneself while maintaining relational harmony. The storyline involving Miley and Courtney adds yet another layer by situating queer longing within the context of separation and institutional constraint, capturing the emotional resonance of letters, memory, and deferred connection, emphasizing how young queer women learn early that their feelings may be considered socially inappropriate or disruptive, and the film treats these expressions of longing as ethically legitimate, emotionally rich, and developmentally significant, allowing viewers to experience the character's hope, grief, and desire for reciprocity without the need for sensationalization, and by doing so, it affirms the value of non-normative emotional labor and the sustaining power of acknowledgement across distance. Throughout all four narratives, the film maintains a careful attention to restraint, reciprocity, and interiority, situating queer women's emotional lives within broader cultural pressures that include professional boundaries, familial expectations, societal surveillance, and the persistence of heteronormative assumptions. And in doing so, it invites audiences to consider the manifold ways women are socialized to prioritize others' comfort, to minimize their own affective needs, and to negotiate desire in ways that maintain social legibility, illustrating how queer women must often operate within frameworks that simultaneously demand visibility and secrecy, care and restraint, admiration, and humility, and the film's approach honors this complexity by showing that emotional intimacy is a site of ethical engagement as much as it is a source of joy and affirmation. The characters' expressions of admiration, repeated affirmation, and careful negotiation are not superficial. They constitute a language of care and recognition that communicates longing, value, and self-acknowledgement in ways that feel authentic to queer viewers who have learned to decode subtle cues, model restraint, and protect relational trust. And the film foregrounds the significance of these exchanges in building a queer, ethical, and affective life, demonstrating that love between women is experienced not only through grand gestures, but through attentiveness, verbal affirmation, and shared moments of recognition that honor autonomy while establishing connection. In doing so, the film also engages with broader feminist concerns, depicting how women more generally are expected to manage emotional labor, to maintain safety and decorum in their relationships, and to negotiate social expectations around desire, admiration, and authority. And by focusing on the interior and ethical dimensions of these negotiations, the film resonates beyond queer audiences, offering a reflection on how emotional safety, self-acknowledgement, and relational authenticity function as crucial forms of resilience in women's lives. The film further interrogates the ways cultural discomfort with women expressing desire or affection for one another continues to shape perception and social response, revealing how both subtle and overt mechanisms of erasure, suspicion, or hypervisibility act to discipline women's relational and emotional choices. And by situating queer women's love and longing as serious, reflective, and ethically meaningful, the narrative challenges the impulse to frame such relationships as deviant, exotic, or consumable, insisting instead on the legitimacy of the emotions themselves and the careful pacing, repeated affirmation, and focus on consent and recognition work collectively to resist the objectification or sensationalization of desire, emphasizing instead the intellectual, emotional, and ethical labor required to form and sustain queer intimacy under conditions of surveillance, expectation, and potential misreading. Each character in the film embodies symbolic and relational roles that reflect real-world dynamics within queer communities, including mentorship, caregiving, admiration, age-differentiated authority, and professional or familial boundaries. And these dynamics illuminate the ways queer women often must navigate social structures that demand explanation, justification, or self-effacement, even as they cultivate genuine connection. And the interplay between vulnerability and restraint, assertion and deferment, admiration and reciprocal care, conveys the multiple registers on which queer relationality operates, highlighting the emotional acuity and patience that queer women develop in order to sustain themselves and one another, while honoring desire, selfhood, and autonomy simultaneously. Throughout the film, attention to dialogue, hesitation, affirmation, and disclosure underscores the subtle, cumulative work of becoming visible emotionally and relationally, illustrating how self-recognition and mutual acknowledgement are often acts of quiet courage in a culture that renders queer women's desires both highly legible and socially suspect. The film's treatment of misperception, clarification, and ultimate acknowledgement between Penny and Alana exemplifies the ways queer desire must sometimes navigate assumptions about heteronormative attachments, showing how relief, laughter, and joy arise when misunderstanding is resolved through honesty, affirmation, and mutual consent. And in this resolution, the narrative celebrates the freedom of being known and wanted for one's authentic self, a milestone of visibility and emotional legitimacy that resonates for LGBTQ+ viewers who understand the cumulative weight of concealment, misinterpretation, and careful self-presentation. More broadly, the film's structure, alternating between conflict, mentorship, longing, and eventual clarity, allows it to examine the ethics of intimacy and the labor involved in sustaining relationships where social expectations are misaligned with personal truth, highlighting how queer women practice emotional calibration, negotiation, and articulation as ongoing work rather than episodic revelation. By centering restraint, affirmation, and emotional reciprocity, the film encourages viewers to attend to the interior lives of women and queer individuals, demonstrating that relational and emotional literacy are critical components of survival, flourishing, and ethical engagement. And the film's refusal to sensationalize or eroticize these dynamics ensures that the audience can focus on care, trust, and authentic recognition rather than spectacle. Ultimately, the film presents a layered, intergenerational, and ethically rich depiction of queer women's emotional lives, exploring how longing, mentorship, misperception, affirmation, and eventual mutual recognition function as foundational to queer relationality, while also reflecting broader truths about the pressures, responsibilities, and emotional labor women face in all forms of close connection. And the cumulative impact of these narratives is a deeply empathetic, safe-for-work, emotionally grounded meditation on how women and queer women in particular Navigate desire, intimacy, and self-visibility in a world that continues to struggle with acknowledging and respecting women's love for women. Showing that true intimacy is as much about recognition, affirmation, and ethical care as it is about mutual attraction. And that becoming visible to oneself and others is a radical, ongoing, and profoundly meaningful act.